listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome to a special edition of the GM Shuffle. Marc Malusis and, of course, the great Marty Hurney, the former Carolina Panthers GM and obviously Washington Commanders Executive Vice President of Player Personnel and Advisor. I'm filling in for Jeff Schwartz on the special NFL Scouting Combine edition as it gets ramped up out there in Indianapolis. Marty, how are you?
Doing great, Marc. This is I'm really happy that I'm here and not in Indy. I loved Indy for 30 years, but it gets kind of hectic up there, and I'm glad to be watching it from my living room.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm looking forward to what we're going to see out there in the shirts and the shorts and all the workouts for these prospective NFL prospects as we inch closer and closer to the NFL draft. The GM Shuffle is presented to you by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Before we get into the scouting combine, let's talk some NFL news and notes and things that are going on right now. Let's start with the trade that has been agreed upon between the New York Jets and the Tennessee Titans. Won't become official until the new league year. But, Marty, what's your take on the Jets sending defensive end Jermaine Johnson back to Tennessee? He'll team up with his former head coach and Robert Saleh down there in Tennessee. And Devondre Sweat, the big defensive tackle, going to New York and playing for Aaron Glenn and the New York Jets.
I think this is a really good trade for both teams, and I like what the Jets are doing because they're getting Sweat, a big 360-pound nose tackle who is going to be able to make it very hard to run the football. You got to make sure he comes in weight-wise and all that, but he's extremely athletic for a player of his size. And then Jermaine Johnson goes to Robert Saleh, who is very familiar with him, and I thought Jermaine Johnson was one of the best pass rushers coming out of his class. The reason I like this on the Jets side is because there are a lot of edge rushers in this draft, and they now filled the nose tackle position, and I would expect them to be looking for edge rushers in the early rounds because
interesting deal.
They'll be there.
Interesting deal, Marty. And the other aspect of it, I want to get your take on it, is we always see when new head coaches arrive in new destinations in the National Football League, they like to bring in players that they've coached before to kind of instill their culture.
Yes.
How important is that for Robert Saleh to have a guy that he's very, very familiar with, that he's coached before, now down in Tennessee and with Jermaine Johnson?
At a premier position, a premier player at a premier position. So you get a guy who has the athletic ability at that edge rusher, which is really, it's the most important position on the defense, I would think, because it's a quarterback league. But, and then to have a guy, you said it exactly right, Marc, in the locker room that can really, extend and deliver the coach's message. It's invaluable, and that you're right. New head coaches come in, they want some of those guys who know them that can kind of spread his message in the locker room.
When you look at the Jets now, you mentioned him, Marty, just from their perspective, how big of a lean now do you think they go edge early on in this NFL draft now?
I think they would go extremely early. And I think that, I think there's going to be a real run on edge rushers early in the first round. I think there'll be some tackles, but when you only have one quarterback, it's probably going to go in the first round. There's going to be positions. There's going to be runs on positions like edge rushers, because once the first couple go, everybody's saying, "Oh man, this was a good list," but now it's starting to get short real quick. So we better. So I do think that the Jets will make a move fairly early on an edge rusher in this draft.
All right, out in Los Angeles, Sean McVay continues to add to his staff. Brian Johnson, a former quarterback at Utah, he's been in with Philadelphia. He's been with down in Washington. Brian Johnson being added to as a senior offensive assistant. But interesting thing when you think about McVay, Marty, is that he's always a forward thinker, looking to try and gain an advantage. One of the upper echelon coaches in the National Football League, there's no doubt about it. But Brian Johnson, not necessarily going to work with the offense, he's going to work with the defense.
Yeah, we read an article by Ryan Anderson in the LAFB that said that McVay was going to embed Johnson in with the defensive coaches to help them look at things a little differently as far as, what are the RPO, what are the keys to some of the things the defense is going to do. I think it's a brilliant idea. I guess he did the same thing with Sean Desai on the other side in 24. He was a defensive coach who he embedded with the offense. But, Sean McVay gets a lot of credit for a lot of things, but man, he is not afraid to be innovative and think on the edge and out of the box. And I think this is a great move. I mean, to put an offensive coach in with a defensive staff, because sometimes, listen, these guys, 5, 6, 8 coaches on the defense side of the ball, they meet every day, and it's the same thing. And you got to make sure that you don't get in a rut. That's why a lot of teams during the buys do a lot of self scouts, and when they do self scouts, sometimes they have the offensive coaches self scout the defense, and vice versa. I think this is a brilliant idea because he's got a guy that can give them another view and other things to look at and help players. And I just thought that was it's a great idea. And Sean McVay, it doesn't surprise you, he's the guy to come up with it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Adapt or die. And we've all seen at times in the National Football League, not at times, all the time, coaching certainly, Marty, does matter. Out to Minnesota we go. What do you make of the comments by Executive VP of Football Operations, Rob Brzezinski, talking about the fact that they're going to explore every single opportunity when it comes to the quarterback situation? They need a baseline level of play in order to be successful. What do you take from Brzezinski's comments?
And Mark, it's interesting because you always look back, okay, at the moves that you made. You're talking about quarterback and you're thinking, they got to be thinking, we had Sam Bradford right here. We had him. We went 14-3 and we let him go. They were high on J.J. McCarthy. You got to come in and bring some competition for him. He's got to prove that he can stay healthy through a 17-game season, which he has not done that yet. I thought that he had some tools to work with coming out, but he was clearly behind the top 3 quarterbacks taken in that draft, and they have to find a guy. And I don't know where you're going to find it. We could talk about this for all 4 segments, Mark. I mean, if you need a quarterback right now, where are you going to get one if you're not the Raiders? I mean, the Raiders, and we're assuming, but the Raiders are going to take Mendoza. After that, I don't think there's a quarterback in the first round. And you look at free agency, I think Malik Willis is a very attractive free agent, but quarterback wise, if you don't have one, I don't know where you're going to get one right now. So I understand the Vikings say they're going to look, and maybe it's guys like Kirk Cousins or somebody like that. That's the name that I hear the most right now for the Vikings is Kirk Cousins. Bring a veteran in and try to help him groom J.J. McCarthy.
All right, stay with the quarterback situation. Go out to Pittsburgh. When you look at Omar Khan's comments saying that they're looking for the next franchise quarterback right now would be Will Howard. They're waiting and waiting again on Aaron Rodgers, and they expect a decision middle part of next month in terms of whether or not Rodgers decides to return for what would be his 22nd NFL season.
Do they have lines on this kind of thing on DraftKings?
I'm sure they do.
All you got to do is look in the past. He's coming back, okay? He's going to wait, and so he doesn't have to. But he'll come back. But the Steelers still need to identify a franchise quarterback because Aaron Rodgers is not going to be there forever, probably not past this year. So I think that's a main key. Omar mentioned Will Howard. They obviously like him a lot, but he's not going to get any better on the bench, Mark. So, I mean, I guess if I was there, my question would be, okay, how good can we be with Aaron Rodgers? Are we going to win the Super Bowl this year with Aaron Rodgers? If we're not, then why wouldn't we play and develop this young quarterback that we think has a chance to be a starter and maybe our franchise quarterback? We don't know that, but we're not going to know until we play him. And I think every year wasted is, first of all, another year closer to free agency for Will Howard. I just think if you really like him, I would rather see them play him and develop. Mike McCarthy is an excellent guru of quarterbacks. I think he can help the Will Howard a lot. Listen, I have nothing against Aaron Rodgers. It's just, he's going to wait a month and he's going to come back and for another year. But are you really improving for the future at that position by doing that? That would be the question I would bring up if I was there.
Reports out in Cleveland, Andrew Berry, their general manager, talking about the fact that both DeShaun Watson and also Shedeur Sanders are going to compete for the starting quarterback job out there in Cleveland. We haven't seen DeShaun a while. We haven't seen DeShaun Watson in terms of being an elite quarterback in quite some time, Marty. How realistic is Watson? I understand he's got the guaranteed contract, but how realistic is Watson as a viable quarterback candidate in Cleveland in 26?
I really think that the only people can tell you that is the people inside that building and how he has matured some football wise and how he's handled everything day to day. Obviously, he's the most talented quarterback on the roster right now. So, and if they could somehow find a way to bring him back and have him be their guy, that would be exceptional. But there have been so many, bumps in the road with him. But I think that they have to at least look and see if they can get production out of him. They gave up a lot. And I just think that, Todd Monken has obviously said, listen, I would like the chance to work with this guy and see if I can get him back to what he was, because he was one of the top quarterbacks in the league if he plays like he can play.
How would you handle Brandon Aubrey away from quarterback here, Marty, quickly? How would you handle Aubrey down in Dallas? A lot of differentiating reports in terms of what he is looking for. Can't use the franchise tag because they used it on George Pickens. We know the kicker is a bigger weapon now than ever has been in the NFL. How would you handle Aubrey if you were the Cowboys, who's a free agent?
I tell you, I'll try not to go too long here. We don't have time. But Brandon Aubrey, Chris Poling was our pro director, and myself at Washington. We love this kid in the USFL. He never was a kicker in college. He played soccer. He went to USFL. He worked with John Carney. We offered him a contract, a multi-year contract with signing bonus and incentives. But he decided to go to Dallas for a no signing bonus minimum contract because that's where he was from, lived outside of Dallas. And every time I see him drill a 60-yarder, my heart just sinks. It's just one of those things where we knew about him. Why didn't we just make an offer that he could not refuse?
You're listening to the GM Shuffle podcast, a special Thursday edition here, a Scouting Combine edition. We'll delve into the Scouting Combine. We'll do that next. Marc Malusis in for Jeff Schwartz. Of course, the great Marty Hurney. The GM Shuffle is presented to you by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Marc Malusis and Marty Hurney with you. I'm in for Jeff Schwartz, a special NFL Scouting Combine edition of the GM Shuffle. And the GM Shuffle is presented to you by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. And it gets ramped up here, Marty. You know this better than anybody with your work in Carolina and down in Washington as well. When you look at the Scouting Combine, I'm curious, what should people read into? Like what's important and what's not important? In today's day and age, it seems like everyone makes everything important.
Yes. And this is just another event. The NFL, nobody does it any better, right? I mean, as far as making the combine and the draft. But just remember this when you're watching the combine. There is no track meet in shorts and T-shirts during half times at games that help teams win. That's not where the game is played. So this is great. This gives you an idea of athletic ability. You're looking for speed. You're looking for change of direction. You're looking for ball skills in the receivers and the DBs. But basically what you're looking at is athletic ability, and the biggest thing, the 40 time will put jetpacks on guys going up the board, and we'll take good players and move them down a little bit. I give you a story. The late Richard Williams loved Anquan Bolden, the receiver that was a first-round pick. He was a top receiver. We had him, so we meet before we go to the combine. We meet with the scouts and the coaches. The coaches had just taken a first glance, but we had Anquan Bolden in the first round. He runs a 4.7. We knock him down to the third. Now, I think he ran faster his pro day, but the fact that he went from the first round to the third round because he ran a 4.7 after he showed that he's one of the best receivers in the country, I just that was the wrong thing to do. And so you have to be very careful about how you use the information that you get from the combine, because you really have to remember it's athletic information. But when you get on the field, there are some guys that just are better football players than maybe they run the 40. And that was Anquan Bolden. And so that's the danger of it. You have to be very careful that it doesn't affect you the other way. And somebody you like and you see, oh man, he didn't run well enough, we're going to move him down. Well, I mean, if he separates and does all the things that you need from a possession wide receiver like Anquan Bolden, then you didn't have to worry about the 4-7. Obviously, that was a mistake we made.
Marty, where's the balance, though, when you look back on it? Because I love this kind of conversation. Like, where's the balance to where what you're seeing and what you're grading out with athletic ability, and then you're looking at tape, and then you're doing the interviews, and then your due diligence on the background. Where's that balance to where you don't convince yourself on a prospect or fall in love with somebody to where you're totally looking at the individual in a good landscape?
First of all, I think it's the decision makers, right? That's what it comes down to. I always believed that as a general manager, you had to work with the head coach, okay, and get to an agreement. I was very fortunate to work with two great head coaches, in John Fox and Ron Rivera, who I had great relationships with, and we could bounce things back and forth. And at the end of the day, hopefully, when you left the room, even though you disagree going in, you come out with a solution that everybody agrees with. I think that, I like the scouts being at schools, and people have to understand scouts have areas, and one scout has the Southeast. Okay. He's going to go to every school in his area, at least the ones with a lot of players, probably 3 times over the year, and talk to people in the facility and talk to the players. They have a really good feel for what type of football player, what people thought of them that lived with them every day in college. So I think that the ideal way to do this is listen to the scouts about everything that they know about the player, and then just be open-minded and don't some coaches come in and they have a buddy who talked to them that like this guy, or a scout likes this guy for a reason and raises them up. You just have to be objective and thorough, and that comes with the decision makers. And I always thought that the head coach and the general manager should really be able to work together and hash things out. I mean, I learned that from Bobby Beathard and Joe Gibbs. They go into Bobby Beathard's room, you could hear them yelling all the way down the hallway. They came out, they were smiling, laughing, and they had the best answer for the organization. So that's how it should be done. It's not easy a lot of times to do it.
Yeah, it's not easy. And molding those opinions. Like if you had to offer somebody, the best advice in terms of with the head coach getting involved, being a part of it, obviously you're working together in tandem, right? Upper management and the coach on the field in order to bring out the result, which is winning football games. What's the best way to mold those opinions and bring those opinions together, Marty?
Well, I think as much as you can have the scouts and the coaches in the same room, and really honestly listening to everybody's evaluation. I think that's number one. I think things like having your position scout be with the position coach of your team at the combine, following them around, telling them everything about the players, and how he graded them and everything he knows about them. I think that the more you can get those two, the scouts and the coaches, to get together and talk about players, in really it's all about how they fit what we do. And that's a hard thing. People have a hard thing doing that. I mean, that's we had a meeting in Watford one year, and I said before training camp, and I said, listen, now we get injuries. We're not going to be able to get guys with all the traits you want at the position. So please list your top 5 traits. So I think I said top 3 traits. Well, it went down 7, 8, 9 traits sometimes. So people have a hard time doing that, and really it's up to the general manager and the head coach to steer that and make the right decisions. And I think, you want to look at Kansas City. I mean, they do it as well as anybody.
We're looking at on Thursday, we're going to get the defensive linemen, linebackers Friday, the defensive backs, the tight ends, the quarterbacks will take the stage. Quarterbacks, receivers, running backs on Saturday, and then on Sunday, we'll get the offensive lineman, Marty, and some of the drills, whether it be the 40-yard dash, the bench press, the vertical jump, broad jump, 3-cone drill, 20-yard shuffle, 20-yard shuttle, 60-yard shuttle. Which drills are the most important, Marty? I understand some of them are position specific, but from your expert eye, which ones drew your eye, or which ones were you the most intrigued by when you were looking at a particular prospect?
Well, on the speed stuff, it's the 10, the 40, and the short shuttle. And the short shuttle shows change of direction. And position drills, some of them I had some issues with. I didn't think they showed a lot. But all you want to see in position drills is explosion, quick twitch, change of direction. Like today with the defense linemen and the linebackers, okay? And a lot of these guys are pass rushers. Do they have quick, heavy hands? Can they shoot them inside? Can they discard and get off blocks? Do they have a burst? Do they have length? I mean, this year is going to be very interesting edge rusher-wise because they come in all different shapes and sizes and forms, but they're all good. So it's going to be interesting to see how teams grade those guys and really align them to fit what they're doing. And I think that's the most critical thing, Marc, is a guy can be, you can have three guys that are very equal athletes, very elite athletes, but only one of them might fit into the role that you are drafting them for. So you really have to have an idea of what kind of role you want them to fill, and do they fit that role?
If you like what you're hearing on the GM Shuffle, there's even more at VSiN Pro. Betting splits, power ratings, and sharp analysis, all for just $9.99 your first month. Go to vsin.com/subscribe and check out all your subscription options. A special NFL Scouting Combine edition of the GM Shuffle podcast. Marc Malusis in for Jeff Schwartz, and obviously the great Marty Hurney with you. Marty, you mentioned it there at the end when you're talking about, specific roles. You heard the Giants general manager, Joe Shane, when he addressed the media after the season, say that, some of the mistakes he made early on were drafting players just based on system. When you're looking at it from an executive standpoint, is it just, let's go get great players, or are you looking at for specific system players in terms of when you get into this draft process, obviously with the scouting combine playing an important role?
It's a cliche, and not many teams do it, but you really should take the best, the highest player left on your board, and just in the draft, and just try to assemble as many good players as you can. In the John Beeson, Ryan Khalil draft, we were at 14, I believe, and I think Darrelle Revis was still on the board. We traded back to 25. And we got 25 and the Jets' second-round pick. We ended up getting John Beeson and Ryan Khalil, even though we had extended Jeff Hardwick the year before. Ryan Khalil was just too good a center to pass up. So we took him. And then you fast forward to 2012, and we took Luke Kuechly, even though we had John Beeson as our middle linebacker, and it eventually worked out where Luke obviously went in the middle and John went outside. But those are the things that I think you have to really make sure you're very disciplined at, as far as if a guy's there and he's an impact player for the next 10 years, need doesn't matter. Take him. Take difference makers. And I think that's what that's the ideal way to do it. I think it's very hard because coaches, again, we talk about coaches and scouts. One of the difference is coaches are going to want to fill needs. They got to go out there and play on Sundays. They want to win. So they got to fill needs. Scouts are looking at traits and athletes and guys who they think can come in and make a difference. And you really just have to mold the two, because, both are right in how they look at things. You just got to meld it together.
As we move along here on the GM Shuffle podcast, Marc, Malusis, Marty, Hurney with you. Coming up straight ahead, we're going to look at some offensive needs for each and every team, or really to highlight some of those teams moving forward, some prospects that Marty's going to keep a keen eye on over the course of the next 4 days out there in Indianapolis as well. What's Marty's take on Jeremiyah Love, the talented running back coming out of Notre Dame? Obviously, we'll look at the quarterbacks, Carnell Tate, the big wide receiver out of Ohio State, and more. Plenty to get to, plenty to chat about the NFL Scouting Combine. We'll get into that and more. The GM Shuffle is presented to you by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome back to the GM Shuffle. Marc Malusis in for Jeff Schwartz, Marty Hurney. This is a special edition for the NFL Scouting Combine out there in Indianapolis, and the GM Shuffle is presented to you by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. We won't see the quarterbacks hit the field until over the weekend on Saturday, Marty, but want to kind of draw upon your experience. You know, you selected Cam Newton, number 1 overall when he was coming out of Auburn. How much work is Spytech, the Raiders, everybody out there in Vegas doing on Fernando Mendoza? It looks like there's only going to be one quarterback taken in the NFL draft in the first round. It looks like he appears that he's going to go number 1 overall. How much work is being done by Mendoza, the former Indiana star?
They need to do as much work on him as possible. And you know, I can relate it to Cam Newton. This is a little bit different because I think everybody has basically coordinated Mendoza as the first pick, right? I mean, he's really the only quarterback in the first round. And so they still have to, they have to, this is what we do with Cam Newton. Okay. So Ron Rivera and I went down to Auburn and got a hotel and a conference room and met with Cam all day the day before his pro day. And then I actually did not go to his pro day. I went to another quarterback's. Ron was there. And then we had a private workout with him. And I always say, you know, we had 4 receivers, asked him, he got 4 receivers to come and catch for him. The workout was at 8:00. We got there at 7:30, and those 4 receivers were there waiting for him. And that was a sign to me that, hey, this guy is a leader. They follow what he does. It was important to them to be there early and for Cam. But I think maybe the best thing we did, and Ron did it, I did it, and then Ron did it 2 weekends later, went down and spent time with Cam's family. Cam's dad, Cecil, his mom, his grandma, his 2 brothers. What a great family. And when you sat there and you just watched how they interacted and how Cecil was telling stories about the 2 boys playing in high school and told a story about how his one son was the center and Cam was the quarterback, and they were on the 1-yard line to win the game and they fumbled the ball and the other team recovered and they lost the game, and they got home and the mom said, okay, let's go up to bed. And Cecil said, no, we got to stay down here and sleep on the wood floor and figure out what happened tonight. So you could tell that football was always a very important part of their lives. So you have to find out all that stuff. When you brought Cam into the meeting room, if you brought 3 or 4 other quarterbacks in there, you know, you might they might leave and you might say, wow, we like that interview. But when Cam Newton got between the white lines, nobody was better. And he just had a way of bringing people along and being a leader. And so I did more work on Cam Newton than any player I worked on in 30 years.
That's amazing when you think about that. But that's that's the risk. You want to make sure you get the pick correct. So when you look at all the work that the Raiders are doing on Mendoza now, when you look at this quarterback class outside of Mendoza, Marty, there are a couple guys that you're going to be looking out for throughout this draft process. Taylon Green, the big quarterback out of Arkansas, and Peyton out of North Dakota State. Why do you like those prospective 2 NFL former college stars and now prospective NFL players?
I'm just looking for guys because really I think there's only one first round quarterback. And I think that after that, there's going to be some guys going the second that I just think that there's a fight. They're pretty much even line. And I like the Arkansas kid because of his size, 6'6", 230. I saw him drop some balls into tight windows. I obviously have to look more at him, and this is where the interview will be very important for him to see how much he knows about, how comfortable he is running an NFL offense. The North Dakota State kid, he's a lefty, 6'3". I like the way he looks at the field. Again, I've got to do more on these guys, but just trying to come up with a couple guys that are going to be later, because I think after Mendoza at number 1, I think it's going to be sprinkled through maybe second, third round, but I just don't know whether I would go that high with any of the quarterbacks except for Mendoza.
When you look at quarterbacks, you've heard guys say it before, it's one thing to draft them, it's another thing to develop them. How important are these guys outside of the first round, right? So if we go on the idea Mendoza goes number 1 overall, potentially no other quarterback, maybe Simpson out of Alabama, it gets drafted in the first round, somebody falls in love with him. How important is then the place where they land to potentially develop and become NFL viable?
Well, and we saw it this year. And I think that anytime, there's certain coaches, there's certain quarterback coaches, offensive coordinators, head coaches that just have a knack of developing quarterbacks. And in this day and age, would you rather spend 10 to 15 million on a backup quarterback or draft a guy in the middle rounds and develop them? And if you're comfortable with them, have them as your backup. So I think that's the key in this thing is if you really feel like, now you don't reach, but if you really like some traits of a guy and think he has a chance to develop into a low-level starter, or even a high-level backup, I think you have to take a look at him in the middle to late rounds.
All right, Marty, let's get into the running backs. I love them. Everybody loves them. You like drafting running backs. We were talking about a little bit off the air as well when you were down in Carolina. What's your take on Jeremiyah Love in terms of where his ceiling is? Where do you think teams would be comfortable selecting the former Notre Dame star?
Well, I'd take him in the top 5. I think he's Bijan Robinson, who I loved. I think that Jeremiah will have as much of an impact on wherever he goes as Bijan, and Bijan's just going to get more and more. They still haven't figured out what they got in my mind. I think the guy is. I think the guy's an incredible running back, and I think that Jeremiyah Love is right there with him. So I think what did Atlanta took him 8th, I think. So I think anywhere in the top 10, obviously, I would not be shocked if the Giants took him at 5, and that might be too high. I know everybody says running backs aren't worth it, but I guess who was the MVP of the Super Bowl this year?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, you're right. That when
right?
you're looking at the ability, yeah.
Now they have to be able to catch. They have to be able to catch, right? And that's what's gonna. And I'm diverting right now, but that might be what hurts Kenneth Walker is he's not the greatest pass receiver. Okay, so you have to be able to do both. But yeah, I think Love is the difference maker. I really do. If you have a young quarterback and you bring him in, I think it just makes it a ton easier to be balanced and let him grow.
When you're looking at the wide receiver position, obviously that's where the 40 is going to come into play because teams fall in love with the speed, but it's different to show speed and wear shorts and a T-shirt than it is when you're showing pads. And what's the separation? What does the tape look like, Marty?
Exactly
you know better than anybody else. But when you look at the receiver position, a lot of love for Cardell Tate. What's your take on Lemon, the kid, Makai Lemon, coming out of USC?
I really like Makai Lemon. I really like it. I'm going to be interested to see what he runs. But he, you talk about separation and hands, and he plays with good strength. I really like that kid, so I'm going to be interested to see how he does.
When you look at, how important is Caleb Downs' workout this weekend and what he shows? You listen to Nick Saban, says of any player he's ever been around, highest football IQ, former Alabama star, former star at Ohio State. We know how safeties can play, especially a guy if you have a creative defensive coordinator that can move them all over the field. How important, though, is Caleb Downs to show what kind of athlete he is this weekend?
Well, extremely important, and his 40 will be extremely important. I mean, if he really runs an amazing time, I mean, to me, Caleb Downs is anywhere from 2 to 10, right? I mean, somewhere around there. I think he's a top 10 player. How high does he go? I don't know, but safeties, he's so versatile and can do so many things that I would think he's going to have a hard time getting out of the top 5. But as you say, his 40 and his workouts will be very important for everybody to see his athletic ability up close.
Marty, when you mentioned it a couple times over the past couple minutes in terms of the interview process, and you took us through the days when you're down in Carolina and the work that everyone did, including yourself, and you mentioned most work you did on any NFL player, any pick you've ever made was Cam Newton. How important is the interview process, where teams get an opportunity to sit down and chat? You've had scouts look at them on college. You've watched the game film. You've seen them work out. How important, though, is the interview process in terms of having guys knowing, and getting a feel of what really makes a player tick?
And very important. But I think the interview process starts with the scouts when they visit the schools, right? Then it goes into the All-Star games, the Senior Bowl and the East-West, where you can sit down and talk to guys. And hopefully some of your coaching staff went to the Senior Bowl and sat down and interviewed some of them. And then you get to the combine interviews, which I've had good experiences and bad experiences. But I think lately most teams are bringing the guys in, getting the position coach to get about 15 plays from the season, put it up, ask him to explain his responsibility, what defense they were in, what his responsibility is, and what the other players' responsibilities were. So you get a good idea of his football IQ and really just the feel he has for the game. So I think that was the type of interview that I got the most out at the combine, sitting and just asking guy question about his background and in childhood, things like that. That's great, but those are things that scouts can do during the season. And I think that the thing at the combine is coaches want to see the guy's football IQ, how much he knows, can he adjust? How does he think? If he doesn't know something, is he afraid to say he doesn't know something? Or does he just say, listen, I don't know that, which is what you want him to do. So I think the interview process is very important, but there's a lot of interview processes.
Marty, quickly here, were there a large percentage of players that you loved what you saw on the field but soured because of that interview process?
Not a lot. No, not a lot at all. I think that there are some, and you usually know the red flags coming from the schools. You know the red flags that you're going to see. But no, usually the interview process did not kill guys. No.
Coming up next, we'll get into some needs when you're looking at the offensive needs as the scouting combine getting well underway out there in Indianapolis. He's Marty Hurney. I'm Marc Malusis. This is the GM Shuffle. That's next, presented to you by the DraftKings Network.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome back to the GM Shuffle. Marc Malusis, Marty Hurney with you. Jeff Schwartz has this special edition for the NFL Scouting Combine off. I am filling in and talk a little football, which is always great with Marty. I love the stories, love everything that goes along with it. And he's got the battle scars to prove it of all the years in the National Football League with Carolina and Washington. I say that glowingly, Marty. You know that. Let's get into some team needs here. Let's start in the NFC East. We'll highlight a couple teams. Let's start with the Washington Commanders, organization you're familiar with. Kingsbury, new offensive play caller down there. Jeremiyah Tunsil, obviously a big-time key. What are some offensive needs here for Adam Peters and company?
Yeah, so number one on Adam Peters' list right now is to get Jeremiyah Tunsil done, right? Their left tackle. I mean, that to me is their most critical need. Now, if you want to run the football, I do think that a running back is necessary. Their offensive line's in pretty good shape. I mean, if you keep Tunsil and you've got Cosme and Chris Paul at the two guards, who I think, and I'm biased, but I think both of them are two of the best guards in the league. And then you got the first round pick currently at right tackle, so you're good there. Could you use a receiver? Sure, you could use a receiver, but I think you need a running back that you need to be able to get physical when you want to. And I think that might be the change with in offensive coordinators now, that they want to run the ball and they want to get more physical. Cliff Kingsbury wasn't quite that guy, and like the small backs and get them out of the backfield. So it'll be interesting to see what direction this offense takes. But really, Washington is in decent shape offensively. I think most of their needs are on defense.
Yeah, they just need Jaden Daniels to go out there and stay healthy for the upcoming season.
That's right.
Because we saw, that's key.
Right.
And he wasn't healthy in 25. Chicago's interesting. Year 2, Ben Johnson. Year 3, Caleb Williams. A lot of success this past year. Obviously, major stories out of Chicago in terms of the future of DJ Moore, one of their wide receivers. When you look at the Chicago Bears here, what do you think their offensive needs are going into this offseason?
Well, they have to make some decisions. They got I keep reading that they might trade DJ Moore. Now, I drafted DJ Moore, so I'm biased. I don't know why you would do that, but they want to re-sign Cole Kmet. They want to re-sign DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is a very critical part of Ben Johnson's offense, and what he does with his quickness, his change direction in space. I cannot see them letting him go. But I think the biggest thing is that they and they're also talking about where they trade their backup Tyson Bagent, because they've had a couple teams reportedly interested in him, because he's a very smart. He wins from the neck up, right? So coaches love that. But I'd be surprised if they did that. But offensively, I think that the Bears ran the ball. They if you add a weapon or two, but you have to keep Cole Kmet in my mind and DeAndre Swift, and then go from there.
When you look at another team I want to bring up, Marty, would be the Atlanta Falcons. New head coach and Kevin Stefanski down there in Atlanta have already made a big decision in terms of deciding to tag tight end Kyle Pitts, who had a breakout season this past year, the talented tight end, the former Florida Gator star. What about when you're looking at the Falcons? When we were talking about Jeremiyah Love, you talked about Bijan Robinson. He had a breakout year. He was unbelievable down there in Atlanta. Yeah. They're looking to win in a very winnable division. What do you make of Atlanta and when you're looking at offensive needs?
I think their picks, their drafts, especially their high picks, have been extremely good. And I just think, you got to find out the quarterback, right? I mean, it's all about Penix right now. Is he good enough or not? Cousins is going to be released on March 11th and probably end up in Minnesota. They franchised Kyle Pitts. And listen, nobody loved Kyle Pitts more than I did coming out. I mean, he was one of the most athletic tight ends I had ever seen. But for the first 3 years, he really didn't play to his potential. Now, this year, especially the back end, he really played well. So you have to ask yourself as a general manager, and it's just not Kyle Pitts. I've done it for years for a lot of guys, is this the way he's going to play when he gets the money? Or did he play that way up to his potential because he was going to be a free agent at the end of the year? But I think that would be my first question with them is they are going to keep Kyle Pitts. So will he continue to play like he did this year? And then I think you have to look for a wide receiver to be on the other side of Drake London, who is a terrific player. And I just think you need more weapons there to help him out.
Marty, back to the NFC East here for a second. The Philadelphia Eagles. What does Roseman do? He's got a lot of free agents. They were the defending Super Bowl champs. They were able to make it to the postseason. Disappointed there. Obviously, a division that the complex, it's changed a little bit with Harbaugh now the head coach of the New York Giants. You got the Cowboys and obviously potentially a healthy Jaden Daniels. What does this offseason look like for Roseman when you're looking at the offensive side of the football for a team that wants to run it? Offensive line not nearly as good, and Saquon Barkley not nearly as dynamic last year as he was 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that Howie and Nick Sirianni have had a ton of questions about really what happened this year, right? And what do we need? And I think offensively, you mentioned, I mean, I think offensive line, they're talking about what do you do with AJ Brown? I don't believe in letting good players walk or getting rid of good players, but only they know how players impact the building, right? And I think that's probably what, from looking in the from outside in, I think that they have to look at their locker room and say, okay, if things went wrong this year, why did they? And do we need to make changes? And there's nobody better at analyzing things like that than Howie Roseman. So he's got 19 unrestricted free agents. Obviously, they have to keep Dallas Goedert, N'Kobe Dean's up, Jahan Dotson's up, Reed Blankenship's up. So he's got his hands full with trying to keep players from their own, from leaving their own team. But I do think that there was something that just wasn't right. It was askew with the Eagles, and I'm sure that Sirianni and Howie have talked about it and will correct.
When you look at Seattle, Marty is another team of intrigue. We talked about Walker. He's going to want to get paid, come off the Super Bowl MVP performance, and he was downright dominant. Darnold obviously was great in the NFC Championship game against the Los Angeles Rams. Schneider has done an unbelievable job rebuilding that program once again. Very, very difficult to repeat. Very difficult to even get back to the Super Bowl after you just went to one. Because everyone wants to get paid. How do you handle it, and what's the offensive needs here for Seattle this offseason?
Everybody thinks they have the reason for the season, right? When you win, it don't matter who you talk to. Everybody thinks they're the reason for the season, and it makes your job extremely hard. But remember what we talked about earlier in this show as far as a general manager having to work with the head coach, having those two decision makers on the same page. Nobody does that better than John Schneider, and he's got a guy now, Mike McDonald, I think, that does it just as well. So I think that the NFC West is going to be looking up at the Seattle Seahawks a lot. Now, I like the Rams as well. There's a lot. I like all those teams, except for Arizona's the only team. But I think the Seahawks are going to be around for a long, long time in contention, just because I do think that John Schneider and Mike McDonald work together. They have the same vision. They had it. That's why Mike McDonald went there, because he had other options. So I think that they have to, what they do a great job at is, and especially John, is fit. What do we do? What talents do we need at each position? What traits are we looking for at each position? And he does a fantastic job at that. And working with the head coach, he did it with Pete Carroll for years, and now he's done it with Mike McDonald. And you can tell that those two are always on the same page, whether it's John and Pete or John and Mike. So I think they will have a lot of work to do, but I think that they will manage through it like they always do extremely well.
I'll be back with Marty on Monday and for another edition of the GM Shuffle, filling in for Jeff Schwartz, and we'll go through some defensive team needs post NFL scouting combine. Marty, we got a couple minutes left to play with, and honestly, I could sit back, relax, and listen to your NFL stories all day long because they're fantastic, and I love them because you get a little bit of a feel in terms of why decisions were made. And how everything played out. I'm curious in terms of, because from those on the outside looking in, we look at this part of the year as being quote unquote lying season. Information is out there for a reason. What do you decipher? Like, what's real, what's not, for the NFL fan out there in terms of what should they latch onto and what's credible?
I think that anybody that's making a decision for a team and that really knows what they're going to do isn't letting those names out. So I would be very careful to believe any of the rumors that I hear, because you don't know where they come from, and it's not necessarily teams that start them. It's just maybe an agent will start it. Maybe, it comes from anywhere. But I just think that I never really worried about leaks. I had guys that would go crazy. We got this coming out. You read the paper on this. And basically I said, listen, if we don't trust them, they shouldn't be working here. And I trust everybody that works here. So don't worry about it. Who cares what gets out there? Nobody knows what a team's going to do anyway, right? So I just think that there's some bits and pieces that get out, but it never really bothered me at all.
Marty, when we look at the scouting combine this weekend in Indianapolis, is this more important than the individual pro days, or are the pro days more important than the scouting combine?
Well, what's happened, Mark, is that if guys run well in pro days and do well, uh, in their drills, they normally will probably, they'll be at their pro day at the school, but they won't necessarily run 40s. They might not do drills. They may do drills, but they will be there. But if it's good enough, if their times are good enough at the combine, then they're not going to run them at their pro day. Now, where it comes into it is if they don't run well, you go back to your school, and a lot of times that track's faster, and you run again, you run a faster time. So that can dig you out of a bad time at the combine. So I think they're both important, but I still think that it's grown to where more people pay attention to the combine, although I loved going to pro days and seeing how guys related with their teammates.
Marty, this has been a blast. I love doing this. I love talking a little scouting combine. I love learning a little something as well. Ankle bend, quick twitch, shuttle, everything like that. What's important, what's not important. I'll be back with you on Monday to react to everything that we see over the course of the weekend out there in Indianapolis. Marty, this has been an absolute blast. Enjoy the combine this weekend, all right?
Thanks, Mark. You too. Thank you.
You got it. That's Marty Hurney. Pleasure's all mine. You've been listening to the GM Shuffle right here, presented to you by DraftKings.